Oh, seriously.
You're gonna be live in a second. All right, here we go. So,
Yeah.
Welcome to another episode of Book Faces Live, the show where we talk to the faces behind your books. I'm Nathan Van Coops, and today my guest is the very special, very talented Rachael Herron. Welcome, Rachael.
Hi, Nathan. I'm so excited to be here and a little bit freaked out to be on Facebook Live. This is my very first time anywhere.
I'm thrilled to have you on your very first Facebook Live. It's an honor and a privilege. So, I posted up a few things about your background, but it's a challenge to even give people your background because you are so multi-talented. You've had so many things going on. You
or
teach.
Very fractured is another way to say it.
Can you tell people a little bit about what you're doing currently? What's your primary focus now?
My primary focus now always has been, and hopefully always will be, writing. Mm-hmm. I tend to be a person who can follow any bunny trail, though, and I get it right from my dad. He's this entrepreneurial guy, and I'm always like, could I make money doing that? I'll try that. But my heart and my livelihood is really invested in writing books. So mm-hmm. I try to spend the majority of my time writing and revising books. I write mainstream literary fiction, I write feminist romance, I write memoir, and I've recently written a nonfiction book about how to fast draft memoir. And I also teach in the extension programs at UC Berkeley and Stanford. Mm-hmm. And I coach writing, and I have a couple of podcasts. So I'm fully self-employed. Oh, thank you. Yeah. It was so nice to meet you, and I met at the awesome Chicago Selmore Book Show Summit.
Yeah, another thing you do as a conference speaker. It's another feather in your cap, which is great.
I love doing that. I've actually got 4 more coming up this year, and it's so fun for me. I love talking about writing, and you might know this, that as writers, even when we're talking to normal non-writers, in the back of our minds, we're always thinking about writing, and we always want to talk about writing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not a chore because it's something that you love to talk about anyway, and it makes it easy to teach because you love it. So,
exactly.
Yeah, so it was a pleasure meeting you in person in Chicago. That was great. So I appreciated having the opportunity to hear you speak as well, and I got a lot out of your talk. And for those who weren't there, Rachael gave a wonderful talk on the revision process and why it's important. And that was one of the things I was excited to delve into today on this episode because, as we were just saying before we hit record, that the revision process is sort of a mystery for some people. People think, oh, well, I wrote this novel. I've got this first draft. I'm just going to go ahead and publish it, right? Or they don't know the difference between revision and editing.
Right.
And because there's copy editing, there's proofreading, and sometimes people are like, well, wait, what's revision? How would you define revision?
I think I spent the first 35 years of my life not having a clue what revision was. I was one of those people, and you may have been the same, and a lot of your listeners, that you wrote your paper in college and you proofed it for typos, and that's all I could do. If a teacher, and they never did, because I was slipped by, they liked my work, but if they had said, tear up this paper and revise it, I wouldn't have known what to do. Mm-hmm. And I wrote 3 books while I was getting ready to actually become a writer. 3 terrible books which will never see the light of day, and they're so awful. I have a 500-page character sketch that I thought was kind of like a novel, and it's not even done. And the reason they're still in the drawer is because I couldn't revise. But to me, revision is learning how to take this real bird's eye view, top-down look at the entire structure of what you're working on, and being able to see not only the plot of your arc, but your character arcs. I'm sorry, the arc of your plot, but your character arcs, and putting all of those things together to get the maximum value within a plot. And sometimes that really means destroying a book. And for those of us who are so close to our work, that's just a terrifying thing to talk about. But in the course of learning how to do it, and I mentioned at the summit, I had to do it because I failed spectacularly on my second bought book. I sold a 3-book deal to HarperCollins.
Mm-hmm.
My first book I kind of wrote organically, and I revised it as well as I could, but it just kind of came out right.
Yeah.
And my second book, which was due 6 months later, on contract, I just turned in a terrible book. My editor called me and said, I love your writing, I love your character, I love your dialogue, but you have no plot.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I said this at the summit, but I remember saying to her, "Oh my God, do you think I can fix it?" And I expected her to say, "Yeah, of course you can. Sure, I'll help you." And I remember her saying real clearly, "I don't know. It's going to be a lot of heavy lifting."
Ouch. Yeah.
It was horrible. So I had to go learn how to take a book apart. And since I've learned, it's become just absolutely my favorite thing to do. I hate first drafts now because revision really feels like where the magic is, where the real fun is.
Yeah, which not everyone shares that view by a long shot. But I think that is a not magical, but a fundamental skill to have because people sometimes do become successful kind of on accident. And then they did something right, but if you ask them what it was that they did right, they don't know. Like, well, this book took off. This book was a great hit, and then they try to reenact this, like you said. Try to build this again. If you don't understand the actual pieces involved, then how are you going to rebuild it?
Right. Right.
So one of the things that I know when I have a book, I'm one of the people who struggles with revision. I'm always super excited about it until I have to do it. And then as I'm writing along in my book, I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be great. Once I have a whole novel, then I'll be able to look at it and think, oh, I can now see the big picture. But then once I have a whole novel, I look at it and think, oh no, now I've got this whole novel. How am I supposed to see it? It's all there. So what are some of your tips for writers to take this big picture view and then start to break it down into little steps that are maybe more manageable?
I have a couple things that I swear by. What I really like to do, I kind of think about this while I'm writing the book, the first draft, sometimes even before I start writing the book, but it changes. But at the end of the book, when I have this really crappy first draft, just, an entire mess on the page, I figure out what its theme is. And a theme is just like a pithy, almost, a cliche, is your theme. One of mine that I often use is family is chosen. So we choose the family that we have around us. Another one of mine is just the mother-daughter relationship. So I'll write a little Post-it. You've heard me talk about Post-its. I love a Post-it in the revision process. And I'll write the theme on it and I'll put it on the top of my computer. So as I go into this revision, I make sure that every scene I'm working on can reflect that scene, that theme in some way, even if it's really, really small. It's just a touchstone to work through the book. The other thing that I think I've just seen this change people's careers, basically, is the very simple sentence outline. A lot of us... Are you a pantser or a plotter?
I am a reformed pantser that is now a plotter.
Oh, that's perfect. I think a lot of us are reformed pantsers. I am definitely a reformed pantser. Yeah. And for absolute newbies, a pantser is somebody who writes by the seat of their pants without a plan, without plotting. But a lot of us start out... What I do is I start out with a rough idea, a rough outline of what I think is going to happen, and it goes out the window, by 25%, and I'm really flailing my way through the end of a first draft. I think something that people nowadays, especially in the indie market where we talk about these things, what we have going for us is that there is a lot of talk nowadays about story structure. And 6 years ago, 8 years ago, there wasn't that much talk about story structure. A lot of us have studied and are actively thinking about, what should happen at that 20 to 25% mark. What should we do with that context shifting midpoint? No matter what kind of process you've used or learned, you could have done StoryGrid or Larry Brooks or The Hero's Journey. So we have this in mind when we write, but what we write is just a bunch of crap. Hopefully that's what you write, and you get to the end, because the most important thing is getting to the end, so you can revise it. But then what I do is I actually go from the top of the book to the bottom of the book, all the way through, and I write just one sentence in an outline form, one sentence per scene of what happened in that scene. So it is not my ideal book. It's not the one I tried to write. It all has almost nothing to do with the outline I started with. But now I'm looking at an actual sentence outline. You know,
Okay.
Tom goes to the store and meets Jane. Jane crashes her bicycle. I have an actual top-down look at the book, and I can read my entire book in 2 minutes, 3 minutes after this is done. And you can't lie. You can't cheat your way out of this one.
Right.
You know, you can't say that this is where I hope the battle happens. You just have to say if the battle happened or not.
Yeah.
And when you do have this in front of you in black and white, your book looks really, really different. Suddenly you can see, oh my God, the person who read, my beta reader really didn't like this character. Now I can see why, because we only saw him at the very beginning and at the very end, even though in my mind I'd written a bunch more scenes, I hadn't actually gotten it on the page. All of these things start to jump out, and you can actually apply, a lot of people, including myself, that's when I really apply structure, is I kind of pants my way through the first draft, and then I apply structure onto that outline, and I say, oh, this was a really strong moment where something contextually changed for this character. Right now it's at the 40% mark, and I have a bunch of filler here. Why don't I move that down to the 50% mark where something really should change and a new journey begin? And think about what I'm going to fill in that stuff above it with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think it would make sense, too, that if you spot a sentence, you've described a scene, and you have a sentence that really doesn't relate to anything else in the book, and you see this sentence sitting there, like, what does that got to do with anything? That needs to go,
Absolutely, and I can almost guarantee you that sentence where you're like, oh, that doesn't fit in my book, is probably one of the best scenes in the book. Like, that is the one that you're married to, that you laughed your way through, or you cried your way through, and you couldn't wait everybody in the world to read this, and it's the one that's got to go.
That's the darling that needs killing.
It's a darling that needs to be stabbed. Yeah. Oh my God. And it's painful, and that is one of the reasons I advocate so can we talk a little bit about revising as you go?
Absolutely, please.
You know how I feel about this. I believe, and I believe a lot of things. I believe that everything I say is right, and that you should not accept anything I say unless it's right for you. But where I will push very hard is I do believe that most writers should write a crappy first draft and get to the end. There are so many writers believe that they are such perfectionists that they just can't keep the book going. They can't keep going forward in the book until the first parts that they've written are perfect. I believe that's the wrong method, unless you can revise as you go. If that is your method, and the and has to be there, and you are getting books done that you are pleased with. If you are just another writer who says, I think this is my process, but I've never finished a book, or I think this is my process, but I've never finished a book I'm proud of, then that's not your process. Your process is to fast draft your way to the end of a book and then start revising. Because most people falsely believe that. And have you noticed, though, that a lot of us, people who thought we had to pants, we become fans of revision.
It makes I think the first time you hit a really big wall and you don't know where your story is going, then you realize how desperately you need the outline. I've broken down partway through a book and then gone back and reread reread Libby Hawker's book on outlining.
Yes,
halfway,
Take Off Your Pants.
reread Take Off Your Pants like 2/3 of the way through a novel. I'm like, I got to start over and figure out what I'm doing. And I was trying to, because I realized I was simultaneously trying to wrap up a series and a book simultaneously. And I'm like, this is way big. I should have outlined this.
I can almost guarantee you that every book on structure I've ever read is when I'm about at the 2/3 mark in a book and I'm panicking.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm just going to learn another one.
Because you see the climax coming, but if it doesn't match up what you've got, you're like, what on earth? I
can usually see the climax coming, but I never know how to fix it.
Yeah.
Ever. Someday I'm going to write a book like that.
I will say that I fall into this weird little subcategory of revisers as you go, that I don't do it out of perfectionism. I do it out of forcing myself to not publish too quickly when it's done. Because I know that, me personally, I know that I'm super excited to revise, like I said, until I get to the revision point, and then I get super excited to publish. And I'm like, oh, I just want to put it out so I can start working on the next one. And so my method of solving that is by not writing the end yet until I'm most of the way revised. I'm not stalling, I'm not perfecting, I'm forcing myself to revise a whole bunch just because I know that when I get to the revision stage, I'm just going to be antsy, and I need to like. I'm putting the
That's
brakes.
Great.
I'm putting the brakes on myself, which is.
And I will admit to you that I have this big song and dance about you must finish your crappy first draft.
Yeah.
But I do also believe that if you're writing to a satisfying dark moment, a really good dark moment in which all is lost and our characters can't figure their way out, it's best if you can't figure your way out. Like, I know that I've written a good dark moment if I get to the end and go, well, the book's over. I'm going to have to kill everybody because there's no way to answer this. And then I will go back. And this is my process. I usually spend about a month trying to write to the end, and then I remember, oh, this is my process. This is where I stop, and I go back and revise all the way to the end. And somewhere in there, that revelation comes, and that's the way to fix it. So I think I do exactly the same thing.
Yeah, I think everyone has to figure their own brain out a little bit. The way they construct story, and we all understand story, but we have to like the way we build it sometimes is different.
Yeah.
You talked at the conference. One of the things you talked about was a variety of passes. You said that you're just going through looking for specific things each time. Can you talk a little bit about some of the passes that you do on a draft?
Yeah, I do these revision passes because I think I used to get just so overwhelmed. Not only did I have my sentence outline, and I know that I'm going to be removing, I've written all over the sentence outline. I know I'm going to be removing the scene, adding a scene here, da-da-da-da-da. So I start at the beginning of the book, and I start to work my way through these ideas. And at the same time, I'm thinking, oh, geez, did I have enough setting? Oh, my God, did I ever describe this person? Is there enough viscerality in their reactions? And trying to do that in every paragraph as you go through an entire 90,000 word book is so overwhelming. So I kind of gave myself permission to really just look at character arc and plot structure in that massive first revision. I call it going from the zero draft to the first draft. My first draft is something I could send out to my agent or my beta readers. The zero draft is the one that I would literally have to come back and kill myself if I accidentally died while it was still on my computer. And I think I mentioned there Jenny Cruzy's truck draft. Your goal is always to get it to a truck draft, which is the draft that might not be good enough, but it could be published if you got hit by a truck. So you're trying to take it from zero draft to the truck draft. And so I do the major stuff, but I do not look at things like setting, because I never remember to put in settings. I put in, they walked into the library and then they're just heads in space. There's nothing around them. And I let that happen until I do a settings pass and I go through the whole book and I add all that in. It's almost like, I'm not an artist, but like a painter, like the oil painters do, like this pass with this background and the gesso, and then they build up adding something else. I do that and everybody has different lists of these if you use this kind of thing, but I do setting, I do, character description, and I do visceral emotion shown through the body rather than telling. So I do that. And then
so does this take the form of like dialogue tags and replacing dialogue tags, that sort of thing, with action, or more than that?
Some people do a dialogue pass just to make sure that just to see if they can take out some of the seds, do a couple more action beats in order to to attach to the dialogue. For some reason, that's one of my strengths, and it just automatically happens. So that's not something I usually look at, but I know people who do. My very last pass and my very favorite pass is what I call the lyrical pass, and that is when I get to go through, because now I have fixed the book. It's in the structure that I want. I know that it works as a book, and it delivers the emotional value that I want to give people. I know that the language is all in there, the setting is all in there, and then I get to do the really fun part, which is go back and read the book through and make each sentence as beautiful or as sturdy or as energetic as I need each sentence to be. And and the reason for that is, again, it's like if you've already done that to these passages and they're gorgeous and you love them, then it is harder to see that they need to go.
Yeah, it's so much harder to cut them if you've spent that much time on them.
Exactly.
I'm being called out in the comments by some of my beta readers. A lot of the people, Kay and Sean, are all people that are on my beta team, and they've been... Cool. I did an unusual thing with this draft of this book I'm doing now. It's book 4 of a series, and I actually gave out chapters as I was writing them.
Oh my God, how did that feel?
Well, I felt fine at first until I had to revise the first 5 chapters like 4 times. I think they saw, multiple versions of the first 5 chapters until I figured out what I was doing. They literally saw this change completely until I figured out where I was going, and then wrote my way to the end. And then, Sean's calling me out for moving up my launch already. He knows that I already bumped my launch date up a little bit.
That's awesome.
But yeah, so these guys are currently in the process. I'm right in the middle of a revision right now, so that's why this conversation is very fitting.
Cool.
And these are some of the folks who are literally reading some of my drafts right now. So that's fun. They're going to be able to pick apart my stuff.
What do you find is the most difficult in revision, and what is the most enjoyable part of revision for you?
I love when pieces fit together. I think I love coming to the end, and then I write time travel, so it's especially satisfying when the beginnings are affected by the ends and vice versa, and people think, like, oh, now I get why that person did that, and it was something that happened in the future that affected their past, and I get to play with all these little twists, but it's very satisfying for me to close loops. And like in any kind of fiction,
awesome.
there's little loops that you have to close, and it has to make sense anyway, whether it's time travel or not. But sometimes I'll go back through, and my problem is in the beginning when I'm first writing, I'm opening all these little loops. And then at the end, I'm like, oh, I didn't use this one or this one or this one. I've got to go and just cut that. And then it's just, heavy use of the delete button. Especially on the first few chapters, just because that didn't go anywhere.
I actually use an asterisk as my flag in my revisions. Other people use the letters TK because those don't often show up together in the English language, if at all. But every time I do that when I start writing a book, I'll put an asterisk next to like when she leans down to pet her dog. I know the asterisk means, does she have a dog? Does she need a dog? What am I going to do with this dog? Usually she needs a dog. But
that's a really good tip. And
then you can search for them, and then because otherwise, also our eyes in revision, our eyes do get used to going over the same things over and over again, and we don't see the problems. Much like when we talk about editing for typos and stuff, we can't see those things.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's impossible. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool.
Why dog? Why dog? Because I don't know. Because they're like surrounding me. I literally have 3 almost within arm's reach. That is the sum total of dogs, but they do turn up.
They end up in books all the time, right?
Exactly.
We have a question from Sean. He says, Rachel, are most books written in a linear way? Nathan seems to do that, but is that common?
That's a great question. I would venture a guess that like 55% of books are written linearly. I think it's the majority of writers write linearly, but I have known a lot of writers who don't. Who wrote Outlander? Diana Gabaldon. She writes like 100% out of sequence, and I believe she has a very hard time putting her books together. And she said that. And that's why it takes her 5 or 7 years for a book, because she has hundreds of thousands of words and scenes that really don't fit together at all. And then she kind of stitches them together. Other people know their whole book, but they go through and write the scenes that are most exciting to them at that moment. Like, I don't feel like writing about this. I'm going to write the car chase, which to me sounds really fun, but my brain doesn't work that way. And I've tried, but if I try to go write the car chase scene and I don't know what they had for breakfast yesterday, I just, I get stuck. I get really stuck. I had a friend who wrote really hot, what is it when, not teleporting, but when you can read each other's minds. What's that word?
Not telekinesis.
Yeah, telekinesis, exactly. Yeah. She wrote telekinetic books.
Telepathic.
Sorry, that's what telekinesis
is
lifting. Yeah. She wrote telepathic books. They were very, very hot, and really, really beautiful. And she wrote all the sex scenes first, and that's how she got to know her characters. And I'm like, that would be like peeking in some windows of people I didn't even know. But it worked for her. That's how she started. I think that most people write linearly. I definitely do.
I think I usually have about 1 scene per book that I've written in advance. I remember my second novel, I just had a scene in my mind where I ejected the main character out of a space station into space, and then I just left him there for months while I wrote the rest of the story.
Why?
I don't know how he's going to get back. I'm like, I'm ejecting him into space just because I feel like it, and then I will solve that problem when I get there. And then wrote my way to it, and then eventually came up with a solution for how to keep them alive.
Awesome, though.
It was
when the pieces fit together, and you know it.
Yeah.
Kay said it takes almost that long to read Diana's books. I agree, and I also love her writing.
Yeah. Yeah, that is part of the problem. If you're writing a big book like that, I mean, some of hers like 900 pages or something.
Yeah, they're huge. And she's got to keep that whole world.
Yeah.
No, I don't want to do that.
Yeah. I want to shift tracks just a little bit, just because, we don't have too much time left, but you write memoir, and you wrote a book on how to write memoir. And I haven't had a memoir writer yet. And that's something that I just wanted to touch on a little bit.
Yeah.
Turning a life into a story. Like, what is the key to successfully transforming? I mean, because your life's not over when you're writing it, so there's no natural ending.
Right.
How do you distill the essence of a life story into a story?
I love that you asked that, because I could just talk about memoir. Memoir is definitely my favorite genre. It's my favorite to teach. It's something I'm super, super passionate about. And the reason I like it is that normal people can do it too. Not just us crazy writers. Like, normal people have crazy lives that really can be made into incredible books. The difference between autobiography and memoir is autobiography is the story of your life. It's how you were born, where you were raised, how you went through your life. Quentin Crisp famously said, an autobiography is a serialized obituary missing the last chapter. So, but a memoir, on the other hand, is you can have as many as you want. You can have a 15-year-old with 3 memoirs. You can have there's something famously called the 6-word memoir, which is an online kind of challenge where you write your memoir in 6 words, using as its inspiration the apocryphal Hemingway 6-word memoir that said, for sale, baby shoes, never worn. Yeah. There's an entire story in there. Yeah. But a memoir is basically, it's about a slice of time in one's life, like the time you went backpacking in the Andes, or stories in your life around a theme. So my memoir, called A Life in Stitches, is a collection of essays written about the sweaters or whatever was on my needles, my knitting needles at the time as I was going through certain life events. And the interesting thing about memoir, and the thing I love to talk about, is that it has the same structure as anything else. If you know story structure, you apply that to memoir writing. You want the inciting incident. You want the first turning point. You want that context switching midpoint. You want the dark moment where everything was lost and you couldn't recover. And you want the resolution. That's how we read memoir, and it's so exciting. I just love it. If you were to write a memoir, if you had to write one next month, what would yours be about?
Oh gosh, well, my wife and I just had a child, so that would be a wonderful little chapter thing to write. I'm sure that
always
shows
about
up a lot.
like a maternal paternal memoir.
Yeah,
I'm an auto buy. I love those kind.
What are some of the different subcategories of memoir that you think are fun?
I love, to be very specific, I really like the recovery from a cult, a cult. I was born in a cult and I got out of it. I love addiction memoirs. There's this one kind called the pastoral memoir, where basically two people, usually it's a couple, buy a farm in upstate New York and learn that they should never have left their banking jobs in order to start this farm. And we see all of the pain and the chickens and and all that. But anything, I'll read any memoir as long as the writer is willing to go into their shame and into their dark parts and actually look at it and lift it up and show it to us. If you just want to tell me about your fabulous life, we're all bored. Nobody wants to read that. That's a sports figure memoir. I don't want to read that. I want to read how people are broken, and I want to read how they fix themselves. That's what I love about memoir the most. And all fiction, actually.
Yeah.
Question. So fiction memoir is a thing. There are some people writing fictional memoirs. It's a very confused line to straddle right now. Michael Chabon just came out with it. They call it a fictional memoir. So there is a lot that is true and a lot that is fictional. It's impossible to tell where those end. I find those frustrating because I want to be either told as much truth as they can know, or I want to read something made up. Yeah,
I'm the same way. I would like to know that this is firmly fiction, because then you start wondering, if you start interacting with this person, how do you know what's true, what they've made up? Although I do love the idea of the imagined actions, like Big Fish, the movie Big Fish, where it's just it's kind of a story about this man's life exaggerated. I kind of like the idea of the exaggerated
that was
life.
Gorgeous. Yeah. I will say that I really, really love that. And the whole question of truth is difficult. That's one thing you have to tackle when you're doing memoir is what is truth, what is it to you, and what do you accept as truth? Will you recreate dialogue that you had when you were 7? You don't remember those words. Nobody does.
Right.
But,
so perception of
the reader will accept
reality.
that. Exactly.
Yeah.
If you present it as truth. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool. Well, I could talk to you for hours, and I just like the sound of your voice on your podcast. I've told you that before. It's just like, I feel like people that when you were a dispatcher, people were probably just waiting for you to call and be like, sure, I'll respond to that emergency.
I don't even know if I've ever said this. I might have said it to Jay once, but on the police radio late at night, they used to call me AM Love, and me and this one cop would try to out sexy our voices. He would say that he was at the station, which was 908D, and I would say I copy, which was 904, and I just remember going 904.
Had to be a lot of fun. Do you narrate your own books?
I only narrated. I've had lots of narrators, but I only narrated Fast Draft Your Memoir, which I will say was a fantastic experience. And even if you're not interested in memoir, for your listeners, everything I know about writing is basically in that book, including there's a whole chapter on revision. So
well, I will definitely check that out because, like I said, I need some help. So, Rachel, thank you so much for coming on the show and chatting with us and sharing your knowledge. Such a delight. Yeah.
And I'm going to have you on my show shortly. So my show is How Do You Write? So if anybody wants to come watch that.
Yeah. Check out Rachel's podcast, the How Do You Write podcast. And where else can people find you and more information about you and your books? RachaelHerron.com. And it's Rachel spelled a little bit weird, like Michael, Richael. I have a Patreon at patreon.com/Rachel, and on that I write essays, memoir-like creative nonfiction essays about the creative life. I love your essays. Your essays are great.
Thank you. That's very nice. Yeah. Very nice of you to say. And Twitter. I love Twitter. I hate Facebook, but I am there. But Twitter, Rachael Herron. You can usually find me there at least 3 or 4 times a day.
All right, fantastic.
Nathan, it's been such a pleasure.
All right, well, thanks so much, and thank you everyone for watching and for commenting. Yes. And if you want to leave more comments underneath the video, we will be able to respond a little bit after as well. Even if you're watching the replay, feel free to ask questions.
Yes, please. Love that.
So,
thanks, Nathan.
All right, thank you, Rachel. All right, talk to you later.
Bye.